All right, so we have variables, we have value types. Let's talk about operators. So if we have these values, we want to do something with them. We want to operate on them, and that's where operators come in. Now, believe it or not, you already know about one operator, and that's the operator that allows you to, that's the assignment operator, the equal sign. So when we say var name equals Joe, that equal sign is the assignment operator. We're saying we want to use that equal sign to assign the string on the right to the variable name on the left. But there are other assignment operators, so let's look at them now. And we'll use them in conjunction with some variables here. So we have the arithmetic operators, or arithmetic operators, however you want to say that. These are your standard math operators that you've been familiar with for many years. So we can have the value 5, and we can say that's equal to 2 plus 3. And that's using the addition operator. There are, let's say work hours equals, or no, actually, let's say non-work hours, and we can say 24 minus 8. And that's the subtraction operator. We could say, let's see, donuts equals 3 times 4, and that's the multiplication operator. We could say, let's see, I'll use an example from the book. The average days per year, no, average days per week. And we can say 256 days in a year divided by 52 weeks a year, and that'll give us the average number of days per week in a given year. And that should actually be placed out with 300 days, 65 days a year. We can have this one you may not be familiar with. We'll say the remainder equals, let's say, I don't know, 51. We use the percent sign, we'll say 2. That's called the modulus, or the modulo. 51 modulo 2 basically means 51 divided by 2, and return or give us the remainder. So what is left over when we divide 51 by 2? That should give us the answer 1. We'll check this in a minute here. And I'll mention that we can also use that plus addition operator to concatenate strings. So we can say there are plus, and we can actually use a number in here, average days per week plus, no, actually back over here, there are an average of average days per week, days per week each year. So notice what I've done here. We can use the addition operator to add numbers, but we can also use it to add strings together, or strings and numbers, put numbers inside of strings. Of course, if this was just string plus string plus string, it would just concatenate those together. So that operator does double duty like that. Okay, so let's do console.log 5, and I'm going to use some Vim. Whoops. I'm going to use some Vim magic to give us a couple of lines here, and we'll say non-work hours, average days per week, just so we can log these all to the console, remainder, and finally here message. And now if I refresh this page, we get 5. Well, let me pull this over so we can see these values beside. 2 plus 3 is definitely 5. 24 minus 8, non-working hours, definitely 16. Average days per week is 6.8, etc. As we said, remainder of 51 divided by 2, or modulo 2, is 1. And they're an average of this number, just like we had up here. It concatenated those together into one long string. So there you have the arithmetic operators. Let's move on to some comparison operators. So let's get rid of all this here, and let's do some comparisons here. Let's see, what can we compare? Well, we're going to compare numbers, of course, to start with. So we can say 10, and you're familiar with these from school, I'm sure too. 10 less than 5. Now what this returns is true. This is a comparison operator, so it's comparing each side of each value on each side of the operator. So it's comparing 10 less than 5. If 10 is less than 5, we will get true logged out to the console. Otherwise, if 10 is not less than 5, we'll get false. And I'm sure you'll know that we're going to get false. If I say, replace that with a greater than sign, we get true. Let me replace this with 5. Is 5 greater than 5? The answer is false. Is 5 greater than or equal to 5? And the answer is true. So we can add an equal sign after that there. We could also do the same thing for the less than. Is 5 less than or equal to 5? And the answer is still true. So that's how the less than, greater than, less than equals, less than or equals to, or greater than or equals to operators work. There are some other, we can also use these comparison operators to compare strings. For example, let's compare, is cat less than dog? I'm sorry, is cat greater than dog is what I've written here. And let's see what our browser says. False, cat is not greater than dog. Well, what's it comparing this based on? Well, the way this works is every character, for example, every letter, like every letter, every character, every letter you can type, any character that you can type, has a character code, a number that is related, that belongs to that character. And what we're comparing here is the characters. So we start with the letter C, and it says, is the character code for C, whatever number stands for C, is that greater than the number that stands for D? And it won't get much further in this because D comes later in the alphabet than C, D has a higher number. And so if I replace this to D is cat less than dog, we're going to get true because cat is less than dog. I should mention that capital letters are not right beside their counterparts. So I could change this here to an uppercase D. And this value will change to false because the lowercase c is greater than the uppercase D, right? So all the uppercase letters come first if we were to line them up in numerical order. D comes before C, so D is actually less than C. So if I replace this by a less than sign, we get the true here. Of course, this works for less than and equal to as well. So if you think about comparing things, you'll probably realize that we want to compare if two things are equal. So let's say, is the phrase cat equal to the phrase dog? Now this is not going to work. And why do you think this is not going to work? Well, because we already saw that the equal sign is the assignment operator. And this isn't going to work. We're not putting a variable name on this side. And so if I ran this in here, we're getting an invalid left-hand assignment, which is an error. Don't worry about errors. We'll discuss them in a later chapter. But this is clearly an error because it's not expecting this. So what do? We use triple equals, 3 equal signs, test to see if cat is equal to dog. And if I refresh this, you'll see here that false cat is certainly not equal to dog. And is cat equal to cat? Cat is certainly equal to cat. Yes, true. Now, why 3 equal signs instead of 2 equal signs? Well, the reason is that you actually could use 2 equal signs. However, 2 equal signs does some changing of the values that we're not going to get into here. So it can sometimes give you deceptive results. For now, always use 3 equal signs. All right. Now, let's talk about the unary operators. Unary operators just means that, for example, what we've been discussing so far are binary operators, which just means that they require 2 values, 1 on each side, to work with them. We're going to discuss the unary operators, which only need 1 value. They operate with only 1 value. So let's create a variable I here. Call it 0 for now. And let's look at the first unary operator, which is the first set kind of is the incrementing and decrementing operators. So the incrementing operators is just we put a plus signs after I, and that adds 1 to I. So now here, if we alert I, come back here, you see that I equals 1 because we have 0 and plus increments I by 1. We could also do plus at the beginning of I, and let's alert I again, and we should get first that I is 1, plus at the beginning, we'll add 1 to I, and alert I. 1 and 2. Now why do we have two? The prefix, which is putting it at the beginning, and the postfix, which is putting it at the end. Why do we have prefix and postfix incrementing operators? We'll see this in a second, but first let's change these to minus signs. And you'll see that we can actually do the same thing and subtract 1. So we have 0, we'll subtract 1 from 0 and then subtract another 1. So you can see we'll get -1 and -2. So those are the incrementing and decrementing operators. But why both the prefix and the postfix? Well, let's do this way. Let's say var, we're going to have num1 is going to equal 1. And then let's create num2 and num3 variables, just because we're going to use them here. Let's say num2 equals plus plus num1. So think about this. What does this do? This might be a bit complex for you right now, but I think you can handle this. Look at this. We have saying the variable num2 is going to point to something in memory. What's it going to point to? Well, it's going to point to the variable num1 with the prefix plus plus operator. Well, num1 points to the number 1 in memory. The prefix operator adds 1 to 1. So you'll expect that num2 is going to equal 2, because 1 plus 1 is 2. So let's alert num2. And actually, instead of alerting, let's put this in the console because I want to see this. And I'm actually going to say num2 :space plus, and we'll use our string concatenation here, num2. Now, let's see what num1 should equal, because this is interesting because we're actually setting two values at once, because remember, the prefix operator like that changes the value of num1 by adding 1 to it. So num1 and num2 should both be 2 now. So this is like we're doing two jobs in one line by incrementing num1 by 1 and then setting num2 equal to num1. So let's refresh this, and just as we'd expect, we get 2 and 2. All right. Let's change this and put the the plus signs at the end. We're using the postfix incrementing operator. So you'd expect the same thing, right? Num1 plus 1, num1 is 2, num2 is 2 as well, because num2 equals what num1 is. Let's refresh this. Notice that num2 is only 1. Why? Well, it's because when we do the postfix instead of the prefix, when we do the prefix, we add the value, add 1 to num1, and then return that. Now, returning is something we haven't talked about yet. We'll talk about that with functions, but the idea of returning is handing it back. So basically what we're doing here is we're saying num2 equals the result of some other operation. Do that operation, and then hand a value back that we'll assign to num2, right? The prefix operator assigns num1 to, the prefix operator does the operation first. It adds 1 to num1 and then returns the value to num2. The postfix operator returns the value first to num2 and then increments num1 by 1. So what happens here is we set num2 equal to num1 and then increment num1 by 2. So it's kind of a subtle difference, and I hope you understand what the difference is. The prefix operator does the incrementing first. The postfix operator does it after the value's been used in this case. And I'll mention, of course, this works the same way for the prefix and postfix decrementing operator. All right, so another useful type of, another useful unary operator is the type of operator. And this is a prefix operator, and then it goes in front, and it's just the word type of. And type of tells us the type of a given variable. So if we have a number there, 48, you'll see here in the console we get 48. And of course this works here if we have a value, let's not call it string, let's call it job equals coder. Right, we have a string like that, and I can say, what's the type of the variable job? The type of the variable job is string. Right? And of course, this works with all of our different variable types. Note here that if we say new date, you'll see what I was telling you earlier, that new date is certainly, date objects are truly objects. The only one that this doesn't work with is arrays. So if I have an array of values here, it says an array is an object because an array really is an object in JavaScript, and we can't get into the details of that, but just know that you can't use a type of operator to see if something is an array. It does not work. It will call it an object. But for every other value type, the type of operator is a good way to find out what type of value it is. Alright, we already looked at the equal sign as an assignment operator, but there are a few other assignment operators. So let's create a variable that we're just going to call num, and we'll set that equal to 10 here. Right? Now, there are a few other, let's say num plus equals 5. What does this do? Well, this is the same thing as doing num equals num plus 5. If you think about this, it's almost like the increment and decrement operator. It's almost like the increment operator, except it allows us to choose how much we're going to increment the variable by. It's basically we're adding to the value that's already there. So now if let's console.log num, and as you'll expect, it'll be 15. There's also other ones, for example, the num minus operator. Let's minus 3 here. And I'm just going to yank that line and paste it down here. And now, whoops, we have 15, we subtract 3, and we get 12. I should just paste that up there as well. So let's keep going here. As you're going to guess, we have, instead of plus equals, minus equals, now we have times equals, or multiply and equal. So if we multiply this by 2, and then we can paste a line, we've multiplied that 12 by 2, and we get 24. So let me add this. We have these comments in the text, but this is going num equals num minus 3. And you'll notice we can't, there's no way you can do this in regular math. There's no value that you can put in for num. Because if you're familiar with math, your average high school algebra, you'll be familiar with the idea of variables. And there's no number that we could put in there that will make num equal to num minus 3. Because this isn't the equalities operator. In math, this is what you would do. When you see an equal sign in math, that's the same thing as your triple equals in JavaScript. 1 equals means we're setting num equal to the current value of num minus 3. And we already, down here, we have num times 2, right? Num divided by equals, well, it's divided by, let's say 6. All right, so this is the same thing as doing num equals num divided by 6. Right, and you'll see that we've divided 24 by 6 and we get 4. And we can even do num modulo equals, let's do 3, and this is the same thing as doing num equals num modulo 3. And finally, right at the end here, we're going to get the value 1. So there you go. Those are the other assignment operators that you may find useful. All right, let's move on to Boolean operators, and they're used to test whether a value is true or false. Now, every value in JavaScript can be evaluated as a Boolean. Every value has either truthiness or falsiness. I know those aren't real words, but everything can either be true or false. Now, most values are true. In fact, there's only a certain number of values that are false. False is, as you would expect, false. Null is false. Undefined is false. And these are all values we've discussed before. An empty string is false, whether it's with double quotes or single quotes. The number 0 is false. Nan is false, and we haven't seen nan yet. What is nan? Nan stands for not a number. For example here, if, let me remove all this here, and I want to console.log. Let's say I tried to add two values that could not be added. For example, let's say I say 49 plus some text. And hopefully this won't concatenate. I don't think it will if you put the number first. Oh, it did concatenate it. Okay, let's do, instead of saying plus, because that has a double meaning, let's say 49, whoops, 49 minus some text. And now if we refresh the CC, we get nan, because we tried to use a math-only operator. The plus sign can be used for concatenation, so that kind of tripped us up there. But tried to use a math-only operator on values that included a value that was not a math value. It was not a number. And so we get the response, not a number. And that is considered a number. For example, I don't think I mentioned this, but right down here, there's this little bar where we could actually type some JavaScript. For example, we could say name equals Joe, and then we could just say Joe. Name, we don't even have to call it in any way, and we can just put Joe there. So see here, down here, if I say type of nan, oh, I have to do nan, capital N, we get number. But it's not really a number. And nan does not even equal nan. So nan is a confusing value, but basically it means no number. And nan is a falsy value. Nan is false. So those are the only false values. We have null, false, undefined, an empty string, the number 0, and nan. Those are the values that return false in JavaScript. Every other value, when considered as a Boolean, is considered true. So how do you consider a number? How do you convert a value to a Boolean? Well, the way you can do it is with the logical not operator. This is a unary operator, but it's a Boolean operator. You put exclamation sign, and then you put your value. So if we, let's just alert, exclamation sign, some string. Now remember, strings are true. Putting an exclamation sign in front of the variable is the not operator. Logical not operator it's called. It will return, putting the exclamation point in front of a value, will return the opposite Boolean value of that value. So in this case, some string is a true, so we should get an alert that says false, because some string is true, and the not returns false. So it's basically saying not true, which means false. You can use this to get a Boolean value if you use double. So think of how this works. It's basically like what you can do in JavaScript. If I just add some space there, that's not really necessary, but just to show us what's going on here. I could put parentheses, around this, right? And so I'm saying this value here, some string, is true, not some string, false, not some string. So putting the double bang will result in us getting true. So that's our first Boolean operator, the exclamation point, which you'll use when you want to say, is this Boolean, or is this value not true or not false? Okay, the next, let's create two variables here, just to show this next stuff off. We'll have var a, which equals true, and var b, which equals false. All right, so let's alert. Let me show you. This is the first one here. We have the logical AND operator, which is ampersand, ampersand. So we'll say A and B. We get the value false back. So these logical operators normally return Boolean values, as you can see here. That's why they're called Boolean operators. Sorry, these Boolean operators, not logical operators. And basically says, are both the values that were given to the and operator true values? A is true, so it's a true value. B is false, so it's not a true value. And so we get false returned because both were not true. Meanwhile, there is the OR. So we can say A, pipe, B, which is the OR operator, right? And so we have A, or. We have A or B, which means are either of them true. In this case, we'll get false back as our first one, because we have two alerts coming here. But true is our second one here, which is the OR, because one of these is indeed true, which is A. I'll mention a neat trick here. When we do this kind of thing, if the first side answers the question, that's all that returned. So for example, here we're asked, are both true? A is true. and therefore A is true, but we can't tell yet whether we're going to return true or false to this question. Are both true? So we have to check B to see, is B true? No, B is not true, it's false, so we return false overall. However, if we switch this, replace B with A and A with B, it would come to this and say, are both of them true? Well, B is false, so there's no way that both can be true if the first one is false, so it won't even look at what A is. And as you'll get into more advanced JavaScript, you'll see that this is a neat way of saying, is something true, then do this. It's a quick way of making conditional statements like that, which we will talk about very shortly in this chapter. For example, you can, if we have a function, remember we've talked about functions very briefly, we're going to talk about them more, but if this function, a function returns true if it exists. So we could say function name, just like this. And basically what this says is, does the function name exist? Yes. If the function name exists, then it will run the other side, which is the function itself, because we got the parentheses there, so we're calling the function. And this would return true, but we're just discarding that. We're not assigning that to a variable. So that's probably a bit above your head, but I'll throw that in there for free. Of course, here with alert, we have A or B. A is true, B is false, but we don't even have to execute A because, we don't even have to execute B because A or B, only one of them need to be true. Since A is true, we don't have to look at B. So there you go. So that is our look at operators. Now that you're familiar with all the different types of operators we can use in JavaScript, let's move on to talk about some actual control structures. We're going to start with conditional statements. So often in JavaScript, you're going to want to determine whether a given fact is true or false, and then do something based on that. So let's start with the example of finding what year we're in, and if the year, I'm recording this in 2011. Let's say we want to output a message that says in the blank century. So if the year that we're given is greater than the year 2000, we want the message to say in the 21st century. But if it is not greater than 2000, we're going to say in the 20th century. We'll just assume for now that it's between 1900 and 1999. So let's begin by creating a couple of variables. We've got our chapter2.js file here, as we have had all along. So let's start with a variable named year, and we'll go with the current year for now, 2011. That's at least the current year at the time of this recording. Let's also have a message variable, and I'm just going to say in this space for now. It'll just be the beginning of our message, and don't worry. I'll show you how this works. You'll notice what I've done here is I've put each variable on its own line, and I've actually added an extra space between these two variables, or between this variable name and its equal sign, just so that the equal signs here line up. This is often done just to give your code a cleaner, more readable look. Alright, so now let's begin with our first conditional statement. This is the if statement. Basically, it goes like this. If something is true, do this. Otherwise, do that. So let's look at how this works. We begin by typing the keyword if, and then we have our condition. Let me just write the word condition for now. In parentheses. Next, we open a set of curly braces. And now remember, spacing isn't important, but I'll hit enter anyway here. We could put this all in one line if we wanted to. So what this says is if this condition is true, then execute the lines of code that go between these curly braces. Now we've looked at several different lines of codes so far, and any line of code that we've looked at so far, plus many other different structures that we haven't seen yet, all of those can go inside these curly braces. Between these curly braces are just normal lines of JavaScript. The only difference here is if this condition evaluates to true, then those lines will be executed. If the condition evaluates to false, they will not be executed. Well, we've discussed the comparison operators and how they return a true or false value. And so anything that uses comparison operator could go in here. We've also talked about how just normal JavaScript values have trueness or falseness to them. And any of those could work in there as well. So for example, let's do this. Let's say if year is less than 2000. We know the year is 2011, and so this is going to return true. Year is greater than the year 2000. So right now, these lines will execute. So what we're going to do is we'll have that message variable, and let's use the plus equals operator, the append to the current variable operator that we discussed earlier, and let's add the text 21st century. Whoops. Just like that. So this will work. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and console.log message. We'll write that message out to the console. Come back here to Firefox, refresh the page, and you'll notice in the console here we get in the 21st century. Exactly what we would expect. But now let's change this year to, let's change it to 1990 instead. If we change this to 1990 and hit refresh, we just get in the. So what are we going to do here? We want to say in the 20th century, if it's between 1900 and 1999. Well, what we can do is add an else statement to this if statement. So after that closing curly brace for the if statement, we can write the word else and open a new set of curly braces. Hopefully this will be pretty obvious to you. What we're doing here is saying if year is greater than 2000 is a true statement, execute the lines of code between the first block here. By the way, this is called a block. Anything between these curly braces. As long as the curly braces don't delimit an object, when you have lines of code between a curly brace, that's considered a block. So this is a block statement that goes inside of our if statement here. But that's just technical jargon. You don't have to worry about that. The practical part is that if year is greater than 2000, all the lines of code in the if part will be executed. Else, or otherwise, or if year is less than or equal to the year 2000, we run this line of code instead. And that actually points out a mistake I've been saying that in between the year 1900 and 1999 will be the 20th century. It's actually 1900 and 2000. Actually, it's 1901 and 2000. I know there's some debate about this, but I'm basing this on the fact that 1900 or 2001, sorry, 1901 or 2001 is the first year that begins a new century. So basically here, if year is greater than 2000, we could also write this by saying if year is greater than or equal to 2001. Those will both mean the same thing, right? Because we're saying greater than or equal to 2001. So let's just change it to that for now. But anyway, we have, 1990 here. So now we're expecting this else statement to run. Let's refresh that, and indeed that's what we get in the 20th century, or what was supposed to be century. I'll fix that there. All right, so that's pretty basic. Let's try something else here. Let's say we want to have if we are past 2001, we'll just assume we're in the 21st century, but we're saying if we're before 2001, we assume we're in the 20th century. Let's make this work for values that are before the year 1901. So what we basically need to say is if we're past 2001, do this, or if we're between 1900 and 1901 and 2000, do this. And then we'll have else as our default. So what we'll do is I'll just space this down here, and then I'm going to say else if we'll have a condition here, and then another block. So let me just bring that back up. So notice what we've done here. We say if this condition is true, run that. Else, if this condition is true, we'll run this block. Else, run this. So let's add something. Well, let's have a condition here first. Well, notice we don't have to test for both ends because we say if the year is greater than or equal to 2001. If this is true, this will execute, and the JavaScript engine will not look at these two, at this condition. It won't look at any of this code here, and so this condition here will never be evaluated. But if this condition is false, then we'll move on to evaluate this condition. We know that the year is under 2001. So here we have to check to see if it's less than or equal to 1901. If it's less than or equal to 1901, we're going to say, and let me just move this up here, the 20th century. So now the single else statement here will only be executed if the year is less than 1901. In that case, we'll say just very distant past. All right, so now we have the year 1990. We would expect still to have 20th century. Let's change this to 1890. And now if we refresh this, we get in the very distant past. So you can see how this is working. Let's walk through it one more time. The year is 1890. Is year greater than or equal to 2001? Nope. So we skip this block. Is year greater than or equal to 1901? Nope. So we skip that block. Else, so anything else, anything that does not match the first condition or the second condition, we'd run the code in the third condition, which isn't a condition, just the else, the catch-all block, if you will. So that is the if and if-else statements. But having if-else statements like this can get kind of unwieldy, especially if we're going to have a lot of if, else if, else if, else if, else. You can imagine that would get kind of unwieldy. So JavaScript has another conditional statement that we can use, and this is a switch statement. So what I'm going to do here is let's assume that we are writing a little app that makes a cup of coffee. So we're going to accept an order size and we'll make a cup of the right size. So let's see how this would work. Well, let's start with a variable called order size. We'll say that we're going to order a medium-sized coffee. All right, and so now instead of, what we could do is say if the order size is small, do this. Else if order size is medium, do this. Else if order size is large, do this. Else if order size is extra large, do this. Else, do something else. And that could get kind of verbose. So let me just show you the first part of how that would work. We would say if order size triple equals small, small, and instead of actually making a cup of coffee, we'll just alert small coffee in this case. And then we would say else if order size equals medium, and we would alert medium coffee. And I'm sure you can see how this would get kind of verbose as we go along. Notice that in every line we're going to have an if order size equals something. So what we can do is use the switch statement, which allows us to cut out a lot of that extra code here to make it a lot more concise. So what I'm going to do here, let me just comment this out so you can kind of remember how it would look if we used an if statement. And now let me go ahead and show you how to do it with a switch statement. So think of a switch statement as it says this is our one condition. And if the condition matches this, do this, or this, do this, or this, do this. So the condition isn't going to be a true or false thing. We're going to look at order size and say, is the order size variable this? Then do this. Is it small? Then do this. If it's medium, do this. And you'll see how it works. So we start with the word switch, and then we have our whatever value is supposed to be our condition in parentheses. You're seeing a bit of a theme here, and that's a lot of these. Most of these conditional statements are going to have the keyword if, or in this case, switch, then parentheses, and then a set of curly braces to show what we do in a given case. The switch statement is actually a bit different, but you'll see how it works in a second here. So, inside the condition here, we're going to say order size. And that's all we're going to do. Just say order size is what we want to compare. And now we have a number of cases that are based on the order size. So let's have a case where order size is small. I'm going to put a colon there, and then we tell it what we want to do if this is the case. So we'll just say alert small coffee. And then I'm going to write the word break, and we'll talk about this word break in a minute. So let me do another case here. So now we have case medium alert medium coffee break. So what's going on here? Let me take out these extra lines here. Oops, can't delete that closing curly brace. First of all, let's run this and see what happens. If we run this, we get an alert saying medium coffee. Great. If I change the order size here to small, we get an alert saying small coffee. So what's going on here? Well, hopefully you can see that order size is being compared against each of the cases. Does order size equal the string small? If it does, we alert this code. Does order size equal medium? If it does, we alert this code. What are these break statements about? Well, a break statement is basically just tells JavaScript to break from its current block and move on. So this is the block. As you can see it, we have the switch. The curly braces here define the block. When the JavaScript comes to this line, it sees that we're going to break from the current block, and so it does not go on to compare any more case statements. It exits the block. And so if we had, well, you saw how we only got one alert. When the switch statement compares the first case, it sees that it matches the first case. In this, when we have small as the order size, we alert small coffee, then we break, meaning we skip all the rest of the code that's inside the block for the switch statement. So let me finish off this filling in this switch statement, and then we'll talk a bit more about why the break statement is required. Because I'm sure you're thinking, well, we didn't have to tell the if statement to stop where it was. It just knew you execute the lines of code within that block. But you'll notice that we're not using blocks for each case in this switch statement. So how does this go? How does it go about doing this? All right, so here we have our finished switch statement. I'm going to switch our order size back to medium. So the break statements again, it still doesn't make sense. Why do we need them in there? So let me make sure you understand how the switch statement works. When you look at it at first, you may think it's kind of like an if, else, if statement, but it isn't. You think at first that if it matches a case, for example here, our order size matches our second case here, which is medium, it will run the lines of code for that case statement and then exit the switch statement. That's not what happens. What happens is once it finds a case that it matches, it will run all the lines of code underneath that statement. If you think that sounds crazy, well, first of all, let me show you. For example, if I take out the break statements, because remember, the break statements tell it, quit the statement. Break out of this block that we're currently in and move on to the next thing. If I take out the break statements, we have medium here. Whoops, we have medium as our case, as our order size here. So let's refresh the page. We're going to get medium coffee, another alert saying large coffee, another alert saying extra large coffee, and a final alert saying something else. This might make absolutely no sense at all, but look at this. If I have a switch, let me do this. So look at this. Let me put a break statement back up here and put one down here. This is why you can do this kind of thing. Because right now I'm saying if this case or this case or this case is matched, run this code. And that makes sense, right? We can match 3 different cases and do the same thing in all three cases. However, that's not exactly what's going on. What's going on is it's saying we match this case, so let's run any code for that case. But there is no code in this case, in this situation. And then we run any code under that one, and then we run any code under that one, and this one happens to use that break statement, so we exit the loop, or exit the block, I'm sorry. So the switch statement was made to be a very versatile statement, as you can see, and its versatility is almost confusing as a beginner. The point of this whole thing is you want to include those break statements so that you don't accidentally fall through to the next case. Even though it doesn't match that case, it's still going to execute the code in that case if you don't have the break statements. If you feel I've done a poor job of explaining this, check out the text in the book. It's a lot easier to explain it in writing, I think, but I hope you understand exactly what this is doing. We'll discuss one more thing here about the case statement. I'm sorry, the switch statement, and that's the default section at the bottom. This is almost like the else statement. If none of the cases are matched, the default case will run. In this case, we're just alerting something else. So if we just say, change our order size to donut, then when I refresh this page, we just get something else. All right. So that is the switch statement. Let's talk about the conditional operator. This is the last type of conditional statement we'll talk about. It's actually an operator in that it uses certain values to return a value. You'll notice that statements don't actually return something. We execute code inside them, but they don't return something the way our operators do. For example, the operator, the plus operator, using the plus operator on the values 2 and 2 returns the number 4. Using an if statement like this does not return anything. For example, I can't go there something equals an if statement because an if statement doesn't return something the way that the plus operator does. However, the conditional operator does return something because it's an operator. So let's see how it works. It's the only operator that actually takes 3 values. We talked about unary operators, which take 1 value. We talked about conditional operators and a few others that you could call binary operators because they take 2 values. The conditional operator is the only JavaScript operator that uses 3 values, and for that reason it's sometimes called the ternary operator. But ternary just means it takes 3. It doesn't really describe what it does. What it does is it's a condition. So let's do this. Let's say the temperature outside, temp value, is 15 degrees Celsius. And we want to have a message, so I'll just leave that message variable like that. So let's say if the temp is less than 10 degrees, I'm going to set that message variable to warm. Otherwise, I'm going to set, I'm going to set the message variable to cold. So we just discussed the if statement, so you should be pretty familiar with what this does, or you should understand it. If the temperature variable is greater than 10 degrees, or than the number 10, we're going to set the message variable to equal the text warm. Otherwise, we're going to set it to equal the text cold. Pretty simple. However, doesn't it seem like a lot of code for just setting a single variable? I agree. So what we're going to do is use the conditional operator to make it much shorter. We can assign the value of the conditional operator to a variable, remember, because it's an operator, so it will return a value. So let's say message equals, and then we're going to say temp is less than 10. And then I'm going to put a question mark, and I'm going to say warm, cold. Don't get scared just yet. We'll talk through this. First of all, let me put parentheses around this part here. This is completely optional, but a lot of people do it just because it makes it clearer what's going on. This is a condition, just like the condition we have here in the if statement, and that's why a lot of people put parentheses around it, because it makes it look similar to this statement up here. this condition up here. And so it's clear what's going on. So if this evaluates to true, we have the question mark here, which is just kind of a delimiter. We execute what comes after the question mark. Now, it can only be a single line of code. It could be a function call. Remember, we'll talk about functions in the next screencast. Or it could just be something like this, warm. And this is what it returns, in this case, warm. The colon means or, and this is what we execute if the condition is false. So, what you can see here is message will be set to warm if temp is greater than 10, or message will be set to cold if temp is less than 10. Well, right now temp is 15. Let me get rid of this. And let me console.log message. If we come here, we can see that we get the message warm. If I change this value here to 9, whoops, then when I refresh the page, you can see we get cold. So that's the conditional operator. It's pretty simple. Just the condition. You don't need the parentheses, as I can show you here. We still get the same thing, but a lot of people put them in just because it makes it clearer what's going on. The question mark, what happens if it's true, colon, what happens if it's false.